Lightning cracked over the ridge, and the door of the cabin shook under a fist, pounding again and again. Wade Colton grabbed his rifle from beside the hearth, before he even reached the handle. Out here, nobody knocked after dark. Nobody came up this road at all, unless they were lost, or running. He pulled the door open, and the wind threw rain into his face. A young woman stood on the porch, soaked through, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold herself upright. Her eyes found his, and she said the words that would change everything. "They want to harm me. Please help." Wade did not move for a second. He studied the tree line behind her, searching for headlights, for shapes, for anything moving in the dark. Nothing. Just rain hammering the pines. "Get inside," he said, stepping back to let her pass. She stumbled over the threshold and he shut the door fast, sliding the iron bar across it, the same bar his father had installed 30 years ago for storms, never once for this. The woman collapsed onto the wooden floor near the fire, pulling her knees to her chest. Wade set the rifle against the wall within reach, and crouched a few feet from her, careful not to crowd her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mara," she whispered. "Mara Whitfield. Wade Colton. This is my place. Nobody comes up here uninvited, so you're going to have to tell me what's going on, and you're going to have to tell me now." Mara's eyes darted to the window, to the door, to the dark corners of the cabin, like she expected something to crawl out of them. "They're behind me. They were right behind me on the road." "Who is they?" She shook her head, teeth chattering. I can't say it yet. Please, just don't let them find me." Wade exhaled slowly. He had spent 6 years building a life where nobody asked him anything, and he asked nobody anything in return. That was the arrangement he'd made with the mountain after everything fell apart in his old life, and now a stranger had knocked that arrangement to pieces with 9 words. He rose and grabbed a blanket from the chest by his bed, tossing it over her shoulders. "You're freezing. Sit closer to the fire." She obeyed, wrapping the blanket tight, her eyes never leaving the door. "You said they were on the road," Wade said, keeping his voice level, the way he used to, when he talked people down from bad decisions in his old job. "How far behind?" "I don't know. I ran through the trees for maybe 2 miles. I saw your light through the woods and I just ran toward it." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know if anyone would even be here." Wade walked to the window and peered out through a gap in the curtain. The dirt road below wound down through dense pine for nearly 3 miles before it hit the county highway. No headlights, no sound, but rain and wind. "Nobody's coming up that road tonight, in this weather, without me hearing an engine first," he said. "You're safe for now, but I need to know what I'm dealing with." Mara pulled the blanket tighter. "If I tell you, you become part of it. I didn't want that. I just needed somewhere to stop running for a minute." "You knocked on my door," Wade said, not unkindly. "That already made me part of it." She looked at him properly for the first time, taking in the gray in his beard, the calluses on his hands, the way he stood like a man who had once been trained to stand a certain way, and never quite unlearned it. "You're not just a mountain man, are you?" she said. "I am now," Wade answered. "Used to be other things." Outside, thunder rolled across the ridge, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Wade set another log on the fire and watched the flames catch, buying himself time to think. He had rules. He did not get involved. He did not go looking for trouble, and trouble did not usually know he existed. But trouble was sitting on his floor now, shivering, and it had a name, and it had asked him for help, using words no honest person could ignore. "Eat something," he said finally, moving to the small kitchen counter. He pulled bread and a jar of preserved meat from the shelf and set them on a plate, handing it to her. Mara took it with trembling hands, and ate like she hadn't in days, though it had probably only been hours. "How long were they chasing you?" Wade asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Since this afternoon. I left the main road when I saw their truck coming up behind me, the second time. I've been walking through the woods since before it got dark." "You know these woods?" "No. I just kept walking uphill, because I figured going up was better than staying where they could drive." Wade almost smiled at that. It was the right instinct, even if she didn't know why. Smart. Trucks don't do well on these grades. That bought you time. Mara set the empty plate down and hugged her knees again. "Are you going to make me tell you everything tonight?" "No. Wade said. Tonight you eat, you get warm, and you sleep by that fire where I can see you. Tomorrow, when the sun's up and you've had rest, you tell me enough that I know how much danger is standing at my door. Fair? She nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders for the first time since she'd arrived. Wade rose and checked the bar across the door again, then the shutters on both windows, out of old habit more than genuine worry. The cabin sat 1,000 feet above the nearest paved road, accessible only by a single dirt path that he kept deliberately rough so that vehicles struggled on it. It was one of the reasons he'd chosen this spot 6 years ago. Isolation had been the point. Tonight, for the first time, isolation felt like an advantage instead of a wound. There's a cot in the back room, he said. You can sleep there if you'd rather not be near the door. No, Mara said quickly. I want to see the fire. I want to see the door. Wade understood that better than she knew. He grabbed a spare blanket and pillow and set them near the hearth, then took his own place in the chair a few feet away, rifle resting across his lap, eyes on the window. Get some sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. You don't have to do that. I know, Wade said, but I will anyway. Mara lay down slowly, pulling the blanket over herself, her eyes fixed on the flickering fire. Within a few minutes her breathing slowed, exhaustion finally winning over fear. Wade stayed where he was, listening to the storm, listening for engines, listening for footsteps that did not belong. He thought about the life he'd left behind, the reasons he'd come up here in the first place, the promise he'd made himself never to get tangled in anyone else's danger again. He thought about how easily that promise had crumbled the moment a stranger said 9 simple words through the rain. Somewhere out there, in the dark, in the storm, someone was looking for Mara Whitfield. Wade did not know who, and he did not know why, but he knew one thing, with total certainty, as he sat there guarding a sleeping stranger in his home. Whoever they were, they would have to come through him first. The fire cracked and settled, throwing long shadows across the cabin walls, and outside the storm rolled on, patient and endless, like it too was waiting to see what would happen next. Hours passed. Wade did not sleep, though his eyes grew heavy more than once. Every sound outside sent his attention snapping to the window, a branch cracking under wind, an animal moving through brush, the groan of the old cabin settling in the cold. Each time, he waited, listened, and confirmed it was nothing before letting his shoulders relax again. Around 3 in the morning, Mara stirred, gasping awake from whatever nightmare had gripped her. Her eyes flew open and found Wade sitting exactly where she'd left him, rifle across his knees, watching the door. You didn't sleep, she said, her voice hoarse. Didn't plan to, Wade replied. Go back to sleep. Nothing's come up that road. She studied him for a long moment. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. You don't know what I did, or didn't do. For all you know, I could be lying to you. Wade considered the question honestly before answering. Because you looked at me like the world had already decided to hurt you. And I've seen that look before. On myself once. I'm not in the business of adding to it. Mara's eyes glistened in the firelight, and she said nothing more, only nodded and closed her eyes again, drifting back into uneasy sleep. By the time gray light crept through the shutters, the storm had passed, leaving the mountain dripping and silent. Wade rose stiffly from the chair, joints protesting the long night, and moved to the window. The dirt road below sat empty, glistening with rain, and the forest beyond stood calm, as though nothing dangerous had ever come near it. He set a pot of coffee over the fire and glanced at Mara, still sleeping soundly for the first time since her arrival. Whatever she was running from, whatever she would tell him when she woke, one thing had already become clear to Wade Colton. His quiet life on the mountain had ended the moment he opened that door, and there was no closing it again. Mara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of a knife working through wood outside the cabin. For a moment she forgot where she was, and panic surged through her chest, before she remembered the storm, the porch, the man named Wade who had let her in, without asking a single question first. She sat up, blanket falling from her shoulders, and looked around the small cabin in daylight for the first time. It was simple inside, built by hand, every shelf and beam showing the work of someone who valued function over comfort. A row of tools hung along one wall, jars of preserved food lined another. There was nothing soft about the place, nothing that suggested a man who expected visitors, ever. She rose and walked to the window, watching Wade split logs near the edge of the tree line, his motions steady and practiced, his eyes flicking toward the road every few strokes. He was watching for something even while he worked. She realized then that he had probably been watching all night. When he came back inside, he set the firewood down and poured coffee into 2 tin cups, without asking if she wanted any. He handed one to her. "Sleep all right?" he asked. "Better than I expected," Mara admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Good. Sit down. You said you'd tell me more when the sun came up." Mara lowered herself onto the wooden bench near the table, holding the coffee like it was the only steady thing in the room. She took a long breath before she began. "My father owns a company, Whitfield Logistics. It moves freight across 3 states, trucks, warehouses, contracts with a dozen retailers." She paused. 3 months ago, I found records in his office that didn't match anything legitimate. Shipments that existed on paper but never left the warehouse. Money moving in circles that made no sense unless someone was using the company to hide something else. Wade said nothing, letting her continue at her own pace. "I didn't understand what I was looking at right away. I thought it was some kind of accounting mistake, so I mentioned it to my father's business partner, a man named Callum Dresch, thinking he could explain it." Her hands tightened around the cup. "Instead, he told me to forget I ever saw those files. He said it in a way that made it clear it wasn't advice. It was a warning." "And you didn't forget," Wade said. "I couldn't." 2 weeks later, one of the warehouse managers who had signed off on those false shipments disappeared. Just vanished. The company said he quit and moved out of state. Nobody ever heard from him again. Mara's voice trembled. "I started keeping copies of what I'd found, hiding them. Because I was scared, and I didn't know who else to trust." "Did your father know what was happening?" "I don't know," Mara admitted, and it clearly pained her to say it. "I want to believe he didn't, but I can't be certain anymore, and that's the worst part of all of this." Wade leaned back, processing everything she'd told him. It was bigger than a single frightened woman running from a stranger. It was a system, a company, possibly people with real resources and real reasons to make problems disappear quietly. "Yesterday," Mara continued, 2 men showed up outside my apartment. I recognized one of them from the warehouse, a man who worked security for Dresch personally. I panicked and left through the back, took my car, and drove until it ran low on fuel, near the base of this mountain. That's when I saw their truck behind me again on the county road. I abandoned my car in the trees and ran." "They followed you on foot?" "I think so. I don't know how far behind they got before I lost them in the storm." She looked at him, eyes pleading, needing him to understand the full weight of it. "These aren't people who make mistakes when they want something buried. If they find me, I don't think they intend to let me explain myself to anyone." Wade set his cup down slowly, mind already working through the terrain, the roads, the choices ahead of them. Whoever these men were, they weren't ordinary criminals stumbling around unfamiliar mountains. If they had tracked her this far, they had resources, and resources meant patience. "You said you kept copies of the records," he said. "Where are they now?" Mara's face tightened. "In my car. I never got the chance to grab them before I ran." Wade absorbed that. If the men found her abandoned vehicle, they would find the evidence too, and any protection those documents might have offered her would disappear along with them. "How far is your car from here?" he asked. "Maybe 3 miles down, near where the county road forks toward the old mill." Wade nodded slowly, already forming a plan he didn't love but couldn't avoid. "Then we need to get to it before they do, assuming they haven't already." "You'd do that? Go looking for it, knowing what's out there?" "I didn't survive on this mountain for 6 years by hoping trouble stayed away," Wade said. "I survived by knowing exactly what to do when it showed up anyway." Mara studied him again, the same searching look from the night before. "You still haven't told me what you used to do. Before all this." Wade rose and moved to the corner of the cabin, retrieving a small metal box from beneath a loose floorboard. He opened it, revealing an old identification card, worn at the edges, along with a folded photograph of men in uniform standing in front of a transport vehicle. "I served for a long time," he said simply. "Investigations mostly. The kind of work that teaches you how people hide things, and how to find them anyway." He closed the box and set it aside. "I left after something happened that I'm not ready to talk about yet. Maybe I never will be, but it means I know how men like the ones chasing you tend to operate. and it means I know how to move through these woods without being seen. Mara absorbed this, something like relief passing briefly over her exhausted features. Then maybe I found the right door to knock on after all. Maybe you did, Wade said. But we need to move fast. If they haven't found your car yet, we still have a window. If they have, we need to know what we're facing before it comes looking for us up here. He handed her a dry jacket from a hook near the door, several sizes too large but warm, and pulled on his own worn coat, checking the rifle before slinging it over his shoulder. Stay close to me, he said, step where I step. And if I tell you to stop moving, you stop moving immediately, no questions. Mara nodded, pulling the borrowed jacket tight around herself. Thank you, Wade. For all of this. You didn't have to let me in last night. No, Wade agreed, opening the door to the cool morning air. But you knocked anyway, and something told me not to ignore it. They stepped out onto the porch together, the mountain stretching wide and silent before them. Mist still clinging to the lower valleys, where the county road wound its way toward whatever danger, or answers, waited below. Wade paused at the tree line, scanning the slope with practiced eyes, before gesturing for Mara to follow. Whatever came next, he intended to meet it on his terms, on his mountain, where he still held every advantage a stranger from the city never could. They moved into the trees together, and the cabin disappeared behind them, swallowed by pine and mist, as two lives that had never been meant to cross now walked forward into the same uncertain danger. The descent through the trees took longer than Wade expected, the ground still slick from the night's storm, roots hidden beneath wet leaves waiting to twist an ankle if either of them moved carelessly. He led the way, choosing paths that kept them under thick canopy, avoiding open ridgelines where a person could be spotted from a distance. Mara followed close behind, her breathing labored but steady, determination replacing the panic that had gripped her the night before. Every few minutes Wade paused, holding up a hand, listening to the forest around them before continuing. You move quiet, he said at one point, glancing back at her. That's not something people from the city usually know how to do. I spent summers with my grandfather when I was young, Mara said. He had land out past the county line, taught me to walk without snapping every branch under my feet. A faint, tired smile crossed her face. Never thought I'd need it for something like this. They continued downward, the trees thinning slightly as they approached the fork where the county road split toward the old mill. Wade held up his hand again, this time keeping it raised longer, his eyes narrowing as he studied something in the distance. There, he whispered, pointing through a gap in the branches. Mara followed his gaze and felt her stomach drop. Her car sat exactly where she'd left it, nose angled into the ditch beside the road. But it wasn't alone. A dark pickup truck was parked behind it, and two men stood near her open trunk, going through the contents methodically. They found it, she breathed. Get down, Wade said quietly, pulling her lower behind a fallen log. They watched from the cover of the trees as one of the men lifted a folder from the trunk, flipping through pages before showing it to his partner. Even from this distance, Wade could read the tension in their posture, the way they exchanged words with clipped, controlled anger. That's them, Mara whispered. The one on the left, that's the security man from the warehouse, Griggs. I don't know the other one. Wade studied the second man closely, taking note of his build, his stance, the way he carried himself like someone with training, rather than just muscle. This wasn't a pair of random enforcers. These were men who knew how to search, how to track, how to handle a situation without leaving loose ends. They have your files now, Wade said grimly. I know, Mara said, her voice tight with frustration. Without those, it's just my word against theirs. And my word means nothing if they get to my father first and tell him whatever story makes me look unstable or dishonest. Wade's mind worked quickly, weighing options. Confronting two armed men in the open, without knowing their full capabilities, was not a fight he wanted, unless there was no other choice. But letting them walk away with the only evidence Mara had gathered would leave her defenseless in ways that mattered just as much as physical danger. There's another way, he said finally. Before you ran, did you ever back up any of those files anywhere else? Cloud storage? An email to yourself? Anything? Mara's eyes widened slightly as she thought back. I sent photos of a few pages to my personal email, weeks ago, before I even fully understood what I was looking at. I never went back to check if they were still there. That's something, Wade said. Not everything, but something. We need to get somewhere safe where you can access that account without anyone tracing it back to this location. Below them, the two men closed the trunk of Mara's car, one of them pulling out a phone and making a call, while the other scanned the tree line with sharp, deliberate movements. Wade pulled Mara further back into the brush, out of any possible line of sight. "They're going to search these woods," he murmured. "We need to move now, before they spread out." They retreated carefully, staying low, using the natural contours of the land to mask their movement uphill. Wade chose a longer route this time, deliberately avoiding the direct path back to his cabin, in case the men decided to follow any tracks left in the mud. As they climbed, Mara spoke quietly, more to herself than to Wade. "I never should have kept those files at home. I never should have kept anything where they could reach it." "You did what you thought was smart at the time," Wade said. "Nobody plans perfectly for something like this. The important thing now is what we do next." They pressed on through the trees, the sound of a distant engine starting somewhere below them, the pickup truck's tires crunching over gravel as it moved further down the county road, likely to widen their search. Wade allowed himself a small measure of relief once the sound faded, though he knew it was only temporary. By the time they reached a ridge overlooking his property from a distance, the sun had risen higher, burning off the last of the morning mist. Wade paused, studying the cabin below for any signs of disturbance, before continuing toward it. "We're going to need a plan beyond just hiding," he said as they walked. "If they're thorough enough to search your car and start canvassing these woods, they won't stop until they either find you or run out of places to look. And people like that don't usually run out of patience." "What do you suggest?" Mara asked. "First, we get you to somewhere you can safely access that email account, somewhere with no connection back to me or this mountain. Second, we figure out who else might listen to what you have to say, someone outside your father's company, who could investigate properly, if we get enough evidence in front of them." "You mean the police?" "Eventually, maybe. But if this Dresch person has resources like what we just saw, he might have friends in more places than just his own company. We need to be careful who we approach and when." Mara nodded slowly, trusting his judgment, even though every instinct in her still screamed to keep running blindly. "You really think we can find a way through this?" Wade glanced at her, his expression steady, unshaken by everything they had just witnessed. "I think you found your way up a mountain in a storm, and knocked on the one door that could actually help you. That's not luck, that's instinct. Trust it a little longer, and we'll figure out the rest together." They continued the climb toward the cabin, the morning sun casting long shadows through the pines, while somewhere below them, two men widened their search across a mountain that had never before needed defending, and now had a reason to hold its secrets close. Back at the cabin, Wade moved quickly, pulling a small radio receiver from a shelf and switching it on, tuning it to the local emergency frequency he kept monitored out of old habit. Static crackled before a faint exchange came through. Two voices discussing a vehicle found abandoned near the old mill road. Nothing official yet, just chatter between whoever monitored these channels informally in the area. "They're not calling this in as a crime," Wade said, listening closely. "Which means they don't want official attention either. That tells us something." "What does it tell us?" Mara asked, standing near the window, watching the tree line with nervous energy that hadn't faded since they'd returned. "It tells us they're operating outside the law themselves, at least for this. If they wanted police involved, they'd have reported your car as suspicious hours ago. Instead, they're handling it privately, which means whatever they're protecting matters more to them than following the rules." Mara wrapped her arms around herself. "So they're just as afraid of exposure as I am." "In a way, yes," Wade said, "which means the moment real evidence reaches the right hands, their advantage disappears. We just have to get you there safely." He moved to an old wooden desk in the corner, pulling out a laptop that looked out of place in the otherwise rustic cabin. "I keep this for emergencies. Satellite connection. Slow, but private. Nobody can trace it back to a location easily." Mara's eyes widened with surprise. "You have internet up here?" "I told you. I used to do investigations for a living. Old instincts don't fully disappear." He opened the laptop and turned it toward her. "Log into your email. Let's see what's actually still there." Mara sat down at the desk, her hands trembling slightly as she typed in her credentials. The connection was slow, the page loading in fragments, but eventually her inbox appeared. She searched through old messages until she found the one she remembered sending weeks earlier, before any of this had started. Here, she said, opening it. Several photographs loaded slowly, images of ledger pages filled with numbers, dates, shipment codes that didn't match anything legitimate. Wade leaned over her shoulder, studying the images carefully. This is good. Not complete, but good. Can you tell what these numbers actually represent? Partially, Mara said. These are supposed to be freight shipments, but the weights and destinations don't correlate with any real cargo. I think the company was being used to move something else entirely, disguised as ordinary freight. Any idea what? Mara hesitated, staring at the screen. I never got far enough to be sure. That's part of why I kept digging in the first place, because I couldn't explain it any other way that made sense. Wade straightened, thinking through their options. This is enough to start with, but it's not enough to protect you completely on its own. We need someone credible to look at this, someone with authority, who isn't connected to your father's company, or anyone Dresch might have influence over. Who would that even be? Mara asked. I don't know anyone like that. I might, Wade said slowly, an idea forming that he hadn't considered in years. There's someone I used to work with, years ago, before I came up here. She moved into a role investigating exactly this kind of financial fraud, corporate cover-ups, that sort of thing. I haven't spoken to her since I left that life behind, but if anyone would know how to handle this properly, it would be her. Would she trust you, after all this time? Wade's jaw tightened slightly. That's a fair question. We didn't part on the easiest terms, but she's someone who values doing the right thing over old grudges. I have to believe that hasn't changed. Mara studied him, sensing there was more history there than he was willing to explain right now, but she didn't push. How do we reach her without anyone tracing it? There's a diner about 40 minutes from here, down past the county line, run by an old friend who owes me a favor or two. They have a landline phone that isn't tied to anything traceable back to us. We can drive there, make the call, and figure out next steps from a distance instead of broadcasting anything from up here. Drive? Mara asked. You have a vehicle? An old truck, kept for emergencies. Rarely uses the road since I don't often go down. Wade closed the laptop gently. Given everything happening, I'd say this qualifies as an emergency. They spent the next hour preparing carefully. Wade packed a small bag with essentials, food, water, a first aid kit, and additional ammunition, treating the situation with the same seriousness he once brought to actual missions years earlier. Mara printed nothing, saved everything digitally instead, understanding that physical evidence could be taken from her, but information stored properly could still reach the right hands, even if something happened to her directly. As they prepared to leave, Wade paused near the door, checking the surrounding tree line one final time before opening it. Once we leave here, there's no guarantee this cabin stays a safe retreat. If they widen their search enough, they might eventually connect the dots between an abandoned car near this mountain and a cabin registered under my name. Are you saying we can't come back? I'm saying we need to be prepared for that possibility. Whatever happens next, we might be moving forward without a safe place to return to. Wade met her eyes steadily. You still want to keep going? Mara straightened, the fear in her expression giving way to something firmer, more resolved. I didn't come this far to stop now. Whatever it takes to make sure the truth actually gets out, I'm ready. Wade nodded, satisfied with her answer, and pushed the door open. They stepped out into the afternoon light together, moving toward the small shed where his truck sat covered beneath a canvas tarp, ready for a drive that would either bring them closer to safety or straight into the heart of the danger still searching the mountain behind them. The engine turned over roughly at first before catching, and Wade guided the truck carefully down the narrow dirt path leading away from the cabin, watching the mirrors as much as the road ahead, every sense alert for any sign that their departure had already been noticed by the men still combing the woods below. The old truck rattled down the mountain road, tires bouncing over ruts still soft from the storm, while Wade kept his eyes moving between the winding path ahead and the mirrors that showed only empty road behind them. Mara sat quietly beside him, watching the trees blur past, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Can I ask you something? She said finally, breaking the long silence. Go ahead. What actually happened, back when you left your old job? You said something happened that you weren't ready to talk about. Wade's grip tightened slightly on the wheel, though his expression remained calm. I had a partner back then, someone I trusted with my life more than once. We were investigating a case similar to what you're dealing with now, actually. A company using legitimate operations to hide something illegal underneath. What happened to your partner? She got too close to the wrong people, and I wasn't there when it mattered most. Wade's voice remained steady, though something heavier moved beneath it. I made a call that I believed was right at the time, prioritizing another lead over backing her up directly. It cost her badly. She survived, but she was never the same afterward, and neither was I. Mara absorbed this quietly. Is that the person you want to call now? The one from the diner? No, Wade said. That's someone else. Someone who took over much of our old unit's responsibilities after I left. My former partner stepped away from that world entirely, after everything happened. I haven't spoken to her in years, and I don't intend to drag her back into anything like this. I'm sorry, Mara said softly, for what happened to her, and for making you relive it by asking. You didn't make me do anything, Wade replied. I chose to answer because you deserve to understand who's helping you, especially given everything at stake. He glanced at her briefly, before returning his attention to the road. I left that life because I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. Not after that failure. 6 years up on that mountain was supposed to be about never putting anyone else in danger because of a decision I made. And now you're doing exactly that again, Mara said quietly, an edge of guilt creeping into her voice. Because of me. No, Wade said firmly. This is different. You didn't ask me to choose between two dangerous situations and hope I picked correctly. You asked for help, plainly, honestly, and I made the decision to give it with clear eyes. That's not the same mistake repeating itself. That's me finally deciding I'm allowed to help someone again. Mara looked at him for a long moment, something like gratitude and quiet respect passing across her face before she turned back toward the window. They continued down the winding road for nearly 30 minutes before the terrain leveled out, pine forest giving way to open farmland dotted with distant houses and the occasional grazing cattle. Wade slowed as they approached a small crossroads, checking both directions carefully before continuing toward the diner. Almost there, he said. Diner's just past this bend. As they rounded the curve, Wade's eyes caught something in the rearview mirror that made his stomach tighten. A dark pickup truck, similar to the one they'd seen earlier near Mara's abandoned car, was parked along the shoulder of the road nearly a quarter-mile behind them. Don't turn around, Wade said quietly, but we might have company. Mara's body went rigid, though she kept her eyes forward as instructed. Is it them? Can't be certain from this distance, but the timing and location aren't a comfortable coincidence. Wade adjusted his speed slightly, neither slowing dramatically, nor accelerating in a way that would draw attention. We're going to continue to the diner as planned. If it is them, running now would only confirm we noticed. They pulled into the gravel lot of a small roadside diner a few minutes later, its faded sign reading, Ruth's Kitchen, in chipped paint, that had clearly seen decades of weather. Wade parked toward the rear, positioning the truck so its front faced the exit. Another old habit from years of training that never fully left him. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and fried food, only a handful of patrons scattered among the booths. A woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun looked up from behind the counter, her expression shifting from mild curiosity to genuine surprise as she recognized Wade. Well, I'll be, she said, setting down the rag in her hand. Wade Colton, in the flesh. Thought you'd gone and turned into a ghost up on that mountain. Ruth, Wade greeted her with a small nod. Need to use your phone, if that's all right, and maybe a quiet booth in the back. Ruth's eyes flicked briefly to Mara, taking in her disheveled appearance, the borrowed jacket, the tension radiating from both of them, before nodding, without asking questions. Booths open in the back corner, phones behind the counter, help yourself. Wade guided Mara toward the back booth, positioning her with a clear view of the entrance while he moved to the counter to make his call. Ruth watched him dial a number from memory, her expression thoughtful but silent, understanding enough, from years of knowing him, not to pry into whatever brought him down from the mountain after so long. The line rang several times before connecting, and Wade's posture straightened slightly as a voice answered on the other end. He spoke quietly, careful with his words, explaining just enough to convey urgency, without revealing details over an unsecured line. After a tense few minutes, he thanked the person and hung up, returning to the booth where Mara waited anxiously. She'll meet us, he said, sliding into the seat across from her. Not here, somewhere safer. About 2 hours from now. She wants to see the evidence herself before deciding how to proceed officially. Does she believe you? About everything? She believes there's enough here worth investigating properly, Wade said. That's more than we had an hour ago. Outside, through the diner's front window, the dark pickup truck rolled slowly past on the main road, its occupants scanning the parking lot before continuing onward without stopping. Wade watched it pass, his jaw tight, aware that whatever window of safety they currently held would not last much longer. We need to be ready to move the moment we're done here, he said quietly. Because I don't think that was a coincidence, and I don't think they're done looking. Ruth brought over 2 cups of coffee without being asked, setting them down along with a plate of toast, her eyes lingering on Mara a moment longer than necessary. You two look like you could use something warm in you before you head back out. Thank you, Mara said quietly, wrapping her hands around the cup, grateful for the small kindness, in the middle of so much tension. Once Ruth returned to the counter, Wade leaned forward slightly, keeping his voice low. The woman I called, her name is Odette Marsh. She used to run financial crime cases for a regional task force. If anyone can look at what you have and know exactly how to move forward without alerting the wrong people, it's her. What did you tell her? Enough to make her take this seriously, not enough to put her in danger before she's ready to act. Wade sipped his coffee, eyes still occasionally flicking toward the window. She's cautious by nature. That caution kept her alive through cases that ended other people's careers, or worse. If she agrees to meet us, it means she already believes there's something real here worth the risk. Mara nodded, though anxiety still lined her features. And if the men outside really are looking for us right now? Then we need a way out of here that doesn't lead them straight to wherever we're meeting Odette. Wade glanced toward the kitchen, where Ruth was humming quietly to herself while flipping something on the grill. Ruth has a back exit that leads to a service road most people don't know exists. We can use that to reach the truck without being seen from the main road. You planned for this before we even arrived, Mara observed. I planned for a lot of things, Wade said simply. Comes from years of assuming the worst possibility is usually the one you should prepare for. They finished their coffee in relative quiet, Wade using the time to study the parking lot through the window at intervals, watching for any sign the truck might return. When enough time had passed without further incident, he rose from the booth and gestured for Mara to follow him toward the kitchen. Ruth looked up as they approached, understanding immediately from Wade's expression what he intended to ask. Back doors unlocked, same as always. Take the service road out past the old grain silo. Connects back up with the highway about 2 miles down. Avoids passing the main lot entirely. Appreciate it, Ruth, Wade said. Just be careful. Whatever this is, Ruth replied, her eyes softening with genuine concern. You always did have a habit of getting tangled up in things bigger than yourself. Wade allowed a faint, tired smile. Some habits don't change, I suppose. They slipped out through the back of the diner, moving quickly across a small gravel lot toward the truck, which Wade had strategically parked near enough to the rear exit to minimize their exposure. Within minutes they were back on the road, following the service path Ruth had described, gravel crunching beneath the tires as they wound past an old grain silo standing rusted and abandoned against the afternoon sky. Mara asked once they'd merged back onto a quieter stretch of highway. A rest stop about 40 miles from here, just off the interstate. Public enough that nothing suspicious can happen without witnesses. Private enough that we can talk without being overheard easily. Wade checked his mirrors again out of habit. She'll want to see the photographs you have, and she'll likely ask questions about the timeline, who else might be involved. Anything that helps her build a case strong enough to act on quickly. Mara took a steadying breath. What if she can't help? What if this is too big, or too tied up in people with enough power to make it disappear no matter what evidence exists? Then we find another way, Wade said firmly. But I don't believe that's where this ends. Companies like your father's operate on reputation and legitimacy. The moment real evidence threatens that foundation, people start making mistakes, turning on each other, trying to save themselves individually, instead of protecting the whole operation. That's usually when the truth finds its way out. They drove in silence for a while, the landscape shifting from farmland to rolling hills dotted with small towns, each mile putting more distance between them and the mountain, and hopefully more distance from whoever had been searching for them near the diner. As they approached the rest stop nearly an hour later, Wade slowed the truck, scanning the parking area carefully before pulling in. A dark blue sedan sat parked near the far end, a woman with short auburn hair leaning against its hood, arms crossed, watching their approach with careful, measured attention. "That's her," Wade said, parking a comfortable distance away. Mara studied the woman as they climbed out of the truck. Odette Marsh looked exactly like someone who had spent years dismantling complicated financial schemes. Sharp eyes, composed posture, an expression that gave away nothing until she decided it should. "Wade Colton," Odette said as they approached, her tone carrying equal parts surprise and wariness. "Been a long time." "Too long," Wade admitted. "Thank you for coming." Odette's gaze shifted to Mara, studying her with the same careful attention. "You must be the young woman with quite the story to tell." "Mara Whitfield," Mara said, extending a hand that Odette shook firmly. "Let's talk somewhere less exposed," Odette said, gesturing toward a covered picnic area near the edge of the rest stop, away from the main flow of travelers. "And you can show me exactly what convinced Wade to come out of hiding after all these years." They settled at a weathered picnic table, and Mara retrieved her phone, pulling up the photographs of the ledger pages she'd saved weeks earlier. Odette leaned in, studying each image with growing intensity, her expression shifting from professional curiosity to something sharper, more focused. "These shipment codes," Odette murmured, almost to herself. "I've seen patterns like this before, in a case that went cold nearly 2 years ago. If this connects to what I think it might, this isn't just financial fraud you've stumbled into, Mara. This could be something considerably larger." Wade and Mara exchanged a glance, both realizing simultaneously that whatever they thought they understood about the danger surrounding them, the truth might run far deeper than either had imagined. Odette set the phone down carefully on the picnic table, her expression thoughtful as she looked between Wade and Mara. 2 years ago, my unit investigated a logistics company suspected of moving falsified freight to disguise something else entirely. We never proved it, and the case eventually went cold when our primary witness stopped cooperating out of fear. The shipment codes in these photographs match patterns we documented back then almost exactly. "You think Whitfield Logistics is connected to that old case?" Mara asked, her voice tight with a mixture of dread and something close to vindication. "I think it's worth finding out properly," Odette said. "But if I'm right, the people involved aren't just protecting a single company's reputation. They're protecting something with a much wider reach, which explains why they moved so aggressively the moment they suspected you'd found something." Wade leaned forward, arms resting on the table. "What do you need from us to move this forward the right way?" "First, I need everything Mara has, saved securely somewhere I control, not just an email account that could be compromised if the wrong people gain access to it." Odette looked at Mara directly. "Second, I need you to consider that testifying to what you found may eventually mean speaking with authorities beyond just my unit, possibly federal investigators, if this connects to interstate operations the way I suspect it might." Mara swallowed hard but nodded. "I want the truth out, whatever that requires. I just want to make sure I'm not walking into something that gets me hurt in the process." "That's fair," Odette said. "And it's why we need to move carefully, rather than quickly. If Dresch and whoever he answers to realize how close we are to connecting old evidence with new, they'll act to protect themselves in ways that could escalate the danger you're already facing." Wade's expression hardened slightly. The men following her already found her car and the files inside it. They know she has more evidence somewhere, even if they don't know exactly where. That means the danger already exists, whether we move quickly or not. Odette considered this, tapping her fingers against the table. "Then we need somewhere secure to keep her, at least until I can coordinate the next steps properly. Somewhere they wouldn't think to look. She's been staying with me," Wade said. "My cabin is remote, difficult to reach without knowing the terrain, and until now, unconnected to anyone Dresch's people would think to investigate." "Until now," Odette repeated. "Which means if they're thorough enough to search for you specifically, Wade, that location might not stay unknown for long." Wade's jaw tightened, understanding the implication clearly. "I can prepare for that possibility. I've defended that property before, in different circumstances. I know the terrain better than anyone who might come looking." Odette studied him for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her eyes. "You always did believe you could handle more than what was reasonable for one person alone." "Maybe," Wade said, "but I'm not planning to handle this entirely alone anymore. That's why we called you." Odette allowed a small, tired smile. Fair enough. Here's what we'll do. I'll take copies of everything Mara has right now, secure it through proper channels on my end, and begin quietly cross-referencing it with our older case files. In the meantime, you two return to somewhere safe, ideally somewhere less exposed than a mountain cabin these men might eventually locate. Where do you suggest? Mara asked. I have a property, used occasionally for situations exactly like this, off the books, secure, and far enough removed from anything connected to either of you, that it should buy us time. Odette pulled a small notepad from her jacket, writing down an address before tearing off the page and handing it to Wade. Go there directly. I'll reach out once I have a clearer picture of what we're dealing with, and once I've determined the safest way to bring this forward officially. Wade took the paper, studying the address before folding it carefully into his pocket. How long do you think that will take? A few days, possibly less, if the connections to the old case are as strong as these photographs suggest. Odette gathered her things, preparing to leave. In the meantime, keep a low profile, avoid using any communication that could be traced, and trust that I'm working this as fast and as carefully as I possibly can. Thank you, Odette, Wade said sincerely. I know reaching out to you again wasn't something I had any right to ask. Odette paused before turning fully away, her expression softening slightly. You saved lives more than once during our years working together, Wade. Whatever happened after that doesn't erase everything that came before it. I'm glad you called. She walked back toward her sedan, climbing in and pulling out of the rest stop parking lot within minutes, leaving Wade and Mara standing together beside the picnic table, the weight of everything they'd just set into motion settling heavily around them. Do you trust her completely? Mara asked as they returned to the truck. As much as I trust anyone, Wade said, which admittedly isn't a long list these days. But she's honest, thorough, and she doesn't quit once she believes something is worth pursuing. If anyone can navigate this the right way, it's her. They climbed into the truck, and Wade pulled the folded address from his pocket, studying it briefly before starting the engine. The safe house Odette had described sat nearly 90 minutes further from where they currently were, deeper into unfamiliar territory neither of them knew well, which in some ways made it safer, and in other ways made it more unsettling. As they pulled back onto the highway, heading toward whatever temporary safety awaited them, Wade couldn't shake the growing sense that the danger surrounding Mara had just expanded, far beyond a single frightened woman running from her father's business partner. If Odette's suspicions were correct, they were now standing at the edge of something considerably larger, something that had already cost people their lives once before, and something that would not stop searching until it either found what it wanted or was stopped entirely. The safe house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, tucked behind a stand of oak trees that hid it almost completely from the road. It was a modest, single-story home, unremarkable in every way that mattered, exactly the kind of place nobody would think twice about while driving past. Wade parked the truck around the back, out of sight from the main road, and led Mara inside, using a key hidden beneath a loose stone near the porch steps, exactly where Odette's directions had indicated. Inside, the house was sparsely furnished but clean, clearly maintained for situations precisely like this one. Wade moved through each room methodically, checking windows, doors, anything that might compromise their safety, while Mara sat at the kitchen table, exhaustion finally catching up with her after the long day of running, hiding, and uncertainty. Looks secure, Wade said, returning to the kitchen. We should still stay alert, but this is about as safe as we're likely to find right now. How long do we wait here? Mara asked. Until Odette contacts us with an update, or until circumstances force a different decision. Wade began unpacking the small bag of supplies he'd brought from the cabin, setting out basic food items on the counter. Could be a day, could be longer, depending on how quickly she can build something solid enough to act on. Mara rubbed her eyes, the weight of everything finally beginning to show. I keep thinking about my father, whether he's involved, whether he's known this whole time, and just let it happen, because it was easier than facing it. Wade paused, considering his words carefully before responding. Sometimes people convince themselves that not asking hard questions means they're not responsible for the answers. It doesn't excuse what might be happening, but it also doesn't necessarily mean he's the same kind of person as whoever's actively hunting you right now. I want to believe that, Mara said quietly, but I also don't know how I look him in the eye again after this, whichever way it turns out. That's a conversation for later, Wade said gently. Right now, focus on staying safe and getting through today. The rest will sort itself out with time. They spent the following hours in relative quiet, Wade keeping watch periodically from the windows, while Mara rested on the small couch in the living room, sleep eventually pulling her under despite the tension still coiled inside her. Wade let her rest, understanding better than most how exhaustion could become dangerous on its own, if left unaddressed for too long. As evening approached, Wade's phone, an old model he kept charged solely for emergencies, buzzed quietly on the counter. He answered immediately, recognizing Odette's number. "Tell me you have something," he said without preamble. "More than I expected," Odette replied, her voice carrying a mixture of urgency and controlled excitement. "The shipment codes match our old case almost perfectly. I've connected them to a broader network we suspected 2 years ago, but never had enough evidence to pursue properly. Mara's photographs, combined with our older files, give us enough to formally reopen the investigation." "That's good news," Wade said, relief evident in his tone. "It's good, but it's also dangerous," Odette cautioned. "The moment I formally file this, certain people will know exactly what's happening, and they'll know it originated from evidence Mara provided. We need to move her somewhere with actual protection before that filing goes through, not just a borrowed safe house." "What do you suggest?" "I can arrange protective custody through proper channels within the next 24 hours. It's not perfect, but it's official, and it comes with resources neither of us can provide alone." Odette paused. "I need you to keep her safe, just a bit longer, until I can get everything in place." "Understood," Wade said. "We'll stay put until you contact us again." He ended the call and turned to find Mara awake, sitting up on the couch, having heard enough of the conversation to understand the stakes had just increased significantly. "They're going to know it was me," she said quietly, "the moment this investigation reopens." "Probably," Wade admitted, unwilling to soften the truth given everything at risk. "But it also means the process of exposing them formally has already begun. Once that happens, hurting you accomplishes far less for them than it did before, because the evidence exists independently now, outside just what you're carrying personally. That's supposed to make me feel safer? It's supposed to make you understand that the finish line is closer than it was this morning," Wade said. "Doesn't mean the next 24 hours won't still be dangerous. It means there's an end coming, one way or another." Mara nodded slowly, drawing strength from his steady presence even amid the uncertainty. "What do we do until then?" "We stay alert, we stay together, and we trust that Odette moves as quickly as she promised." Wade moved to check the windows once more, scanning the darkening tree line surrounding the property. "And we prepare for the possibility that whoever is hunting you might find a way to move before official protection arrives." Outside, the sun continued its descent behind the distant hills, shadows stretching long across the quiet property, while somewhere beyond the trees, unseen and unknown, the danger that had chased Mara Whitfield from her home continued searching, patient and unrelenting, for the one thread capable of unraveling everything they were trying to protect. Night settled fully over the property, and Wade positioned himself near the front window, rifle within easy reach, watching the darkened driveway for any sign of movement. Mara sat nearby, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, her mind cycling endlessly through everything that had happened since the storm the night before. "Do you think they know about this place?" she asked quietly. "I don't see how they could," Wade said. "Odette's careful, and this location isn't connected to either of us on paper. But caution costs nothing, so we stay alert regardless." Around midnight, a faint sound reached Wade's ears, something distinct from the usual rustle of wind through the trees. He rose slowly, moving to the window without making noise, scanning the darkness beyond the glass. "What is it?" Mara whispered, noticing his sudden stillness. "Not sure yet," Wade said. "Stay low, away from the windows." He moved through the house methodically, checking each point of entry, his senses heightened in a way that reminded him sharply of years long past. Near the back door, he paused, catching sight of a faint light moving through the trees at the edge of the property, too controlled and deliberate to be anything natural. "Someone's out there," he said quietly, returning to where Mara waited. "Might be nothing, might be exactly what we're worried about. Either way, we need to be ready." Mara's breathing quickened, but she nodded, drawing on whatever composure she had left. "What do? We don't wait to find out who it is the hard way," Wade said. "There's a route out through the back, past the tree line, that leads toward a neighboring property about a mile out. If this location's been compromised, we move before they close in completely." He grabbed his bag and rifle, guiding Mara quickly but quietly toward the back of the house. Just as they reached the door, a beam of light swept across the nearby trees, followed by the distinct sound of a vehicle idling somewhere down the long driveway. "They found us," Mara breathed, panic threatening to overtake her composure. "Maybe," Wade said, his voice remaining calm despite the tension radiating through his frame. "Or maybe it's Odette's people arriving early. Either way, we don't take the risk of finding out standing here." They slipped out the back door into the cool night air, moving quickly through the darkened yard toward the tree line, Wade leading with practiced efficiency despite the unfamiliar terrain. Behind them, voices carried faintly on the wind, too distant to make out words, but clear enough to confirm they weren't alone. As they reached the cover of the trees, Wade's phone buzzed urgently in his pocket. He answered quietly, keeping his voice low. "Wade, it's Odette. I sent an advance team to secure the property early, given how quickly things are moving on my end. Please tell me that's who's approaching right now, and not someone else." Relief flooded through Wade's chest, though he kept his voice measured. "We saw lights and heard a vehicle, assumed the worst, and moved to the tree line as a precaution. Smart move, given the circumstances, but you can stand down. My people are there to secure both of you properly, and move you somewhere with full protection immediately." Odette's voice carried genuine relief of her own. "The investigation is officially open now. Documents have been filed, and the network I mentioned earlier is being investigated at a level neither Dresch nor anyone connected to him can easily interfere with." Wade let out a slow breath, some of the tension leaving his shoulders for the first time since the whole ordeal began. "That's good news." "It gets better," Odette continued. "We identified the man following Mara, the one she called Griggs, along with his associate. Both were taken into custody about an hour ago, attempting to cross state lines with materials matching exactly what we suspected. Between their possession of those materials and Mara's evidence, we have enough now to move directly against the larger operation, and against Dresch specifically." Mara, listening closely beside Wade, felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight since the moment she'd first knocked on his cabin door. "It's really happening? They're actually being held accountable?" "It's happening," Odette confirmed. "There's still work ahead, testimony, additional evidence gathering, likely some uncomfortable conversations with your father, depending on what we uncover about his knowledge of all this. But the immediate danger to you specifically has decreased significantly with these arrests." Wade guided Mara back toward the house, where several figures now stood near the porch, clearly part of Odette's advanced security team, rather than any threat. Relief settled over both of them as they approached, recognizing the calm, professional demeanor of people there to help rather than harm. "You're safe now," one of the agents said to Mara as they reached the porch. "We'll get you settled somewhere secure for the remainder of this process, and arrangements will be made for you to give a formal statement once you're ready." Mara nodded, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from danger to safety, glancing toward Wade, with an expression of gratitude too large for words to fully capture. "None of this happens without you," she said quietly. "I want you to know that." "You knocked on the right door," Wade said simply. "That's what happened." As the agents began organizing the transition to a fully secured location, Wade stepped back slightly, watching the scene unfold with a complicated mixture of relief and reflection, understanding that whatever came next for Mara, her most immediate danger had finally, truly passed. 3 weeks passed before Wade saw Mara again. In that time, the investigation Odette had opened grew far beyond what any of them initially expected, uncovering a network of falsified shipments that had been quietly funneling illegal goods across state lines for years, hidden behind the legitimate operations of Whitfield Logistics and several other companies connected to Callum Dresch. Griggs and his associate, facing serious charges of their own, cooperated extensively once they understood the extent of evidence already gathered against them, providing testimony that implicated Dresch directly, while raising serious, still unresolved questions about how much Mara's father had known. Wade received occasional updates from Odette during those weeks, brief phone calls confirming progress without revealing more than necessary over an unsecured line. He returned to his cabin during this time, resuming the quiet routines that had defined his life for 6 years, though something had shifted in him that made the silence feel different now, less like peace and more like waiting. On a clear autumn afternoon, a car he didn't recognize made its way up the narrow dirt road toward his cabin, moving carefully over the same rough terrain that had always discouraged casual visitors. Wade watched it approach from the porch, rifle resting nearby out of habit rather than genuine concern, and felt something ease in his chest when Mara stepped out of the driver's seat, looking considerably lighter than the last time he'd seen her. "You drove all the way up here yourself," Wade said as she approached. "Wanted to see the place in daylight, properly, without running for my life the whole time," Mara said, a genuine smile reaching her eyes for what looked like the first time in longer than 3 weeks. "Also wanted to update you in person, since you disappeared back up your mountain the moment things were handled." "Didn't disappear," Wade said. "Just went home." Mara looked around at the cabin, the surrounding trees, the quiet stillness of the mountain that had once felt so threatening, and now, in daylight, felt almost peaceful. "The investigation is moving forward faster than anyone expected. Dresch was arrested 2 days ago, formally charged with multiple counts related to fraud and the illegal network Odette suspected from the start." "And your father?" Mara's expression grew more complicated. "He's cooperating fully with investigators, and from what they've found so far, it looks like he genuinely didn't know the extent of what Dresch was doing, though he admits he should have asked more questions than he did. It's not innocence exactly, but it's not the same as knowingly hiding something either." "How are you handling all that?" "One day at a time," Mara admitted. "We're talking again, slowly, rebuilding something that isn't quite what it was before, but isn't broken beyond repair either. It's complicated, but it's honest now, which is more than I could say a month ago." Wade nodded, understanding the weight behind those simple words better than most people could. "That's more progress than a lot of people manage after something like this." "I wanted to thank you properly," Mara said, turning to face him directly. "Not just for opening your door that night, but for everything after. You didn't have to become part of any of this, and you did anyway, at real risk to yourself. You needed help," Wade said simply. "I was in a position to give it. Wasn't a complicated decision, even if it felt like a large one at the time." "It was a complicated decision," Mara corrected gently. "You told me yourself what happened with your old partner, how much that failure weighed on you. Helping me meant risking that same kind of weight again, and you chose to do it anyway." Wade considered her words for a long moment, looking out over the mountain that had been his solitary refuge for 6 long years. "Maybe I needed a reminder that helping someone doesn't always end the way that old memory did. Maybe you gave me that as much as I gave you protection." Mara smiled, something warm and genuine passing between them in the quiet mountain air. "Odette mentioned she's been trying to convince you to consult occasionally on cases like this, using your experience without requiring you to fully return to that old life." "She's mentioned something along those lines," Wade admitted. "Haven't decided yet." "For what it's worth," Mara said, "I think you'd be good at it. And I think part of you misses using those skills for something that matters, even if the mountain has been good for you these past years." Wade allowed himself a small, genuine smile, something that had grown rarer during his years of isolation, but now came more easily than it once had. "Maybe. We'll see." They stood together for a while longer, watching the afternoon light shift across the valley below, 2 people whose lives had collided unexpectedly during a single stormy night, and emerged from it changed in ways neither had fully anticipated. Mara eventually returned to her car, promising to keep him updated as the investigation continued, while Wade remained on the porch, watching until her vehicle disappeared down the winding mountain road. He turned back toward his cabin, the same quiet structure that had sheltered him through 6 years of solitude, and found himself thinking not about the danger that had passed, but about what might come next, now that he'd remembered what it felt like to matter to someone beyond the boundaries of his own mountain. The wind moved gently through the pines, carrying with it the scent of autumn and the quiet promise of change, as Wade Colton stepped back inside his cabin, no longer entirely certain that solitude was the only life left worth living.